ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hi News Daily fans, I'm Erin Park, host of the new podcast series Expanse, Nowhere Man. I've been on a mission to try to understand why in 1999 American man Robert Baguki plunged into the Great Sandy Desert on a spiritual quest. But it's looking like I'm going to have to go to the freezing heart of Alaska to find answers.
Oh my God.
To come with me on this strange journey, search Expanse on the ABC Listen app.
Oh my gosh.
After heaping so much praise on his Russian counterpart, Donald Trump's view of Vladimir Putin has finally soured. But is the US president's demand for a ceasefire in the Ukraine war in 50 days' time and a promise of US weapons for NATO really a sign that the bromance is over? Today, Russia expert Matthew Sussex from the Centre for European Studies at the ANU on how Putin's still playing Trump. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal Land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Matt, it was just 6 months ago, of course, that Donald Trump was ripping shreds off the Ukrainian president in the Oval Office.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
But now it seems he's realised he might actually be the good guy.
Yes, look, this is a big reversal by Trump, having called Zelensky a dictator and told him that, you know, he was responsible for the war and that it was his choices that were making his people keep dying at the hands of the Russians, to now suddenly saying that he's going to allow the United States to sell weapons to NATO, which those countries can then buy and give to the Ukrainians.
This is to say that this is a very big deal we've made. This is billions of dollars worth of military equipment is going to be purchased from the United States, going to NATO, etc. And that's going to be quickly distributed to the battlefield.
So it's a pretty big 180-degree shift.
Sure is. All right. Well, Donald Trump's glowing view of Vladimir Putin, it has been going downhill for a while now. But it may have been his wife, Melania, who convinced Donald Trump that he actually cannot trust Vladimir Putin.
Well, look, I mean, it's supposedly Trump said to Melania, I had another lovely call with Putin.
I go home, I tell the First Lady, and I spoke to Vladimir today. We had a wonderful conversation. She said, oh, really? Another city was just hit. So it's like, yeah. Look.
And, you know, that he took inspiration from that and it changed his mind. Look, I don't know whether this is true or not, or whether it's a convenient story. Certainly, you know, Nancy Reagan used to consult her astrologer before she gave Ronald Reagan advice, or at least that was the story.
Yeah.
And if we're kind of left with Melania diplomacy, I think it is, you know, possibly scratching the bottom of the barrel, and we'd prefer to go through official channels.
Oh, that's harsh, Matt. All right, well, Trump himself has acknowledged now that the war in Ukraine has been very difficult to end because, of course, he had wanted to do it in a day, and now he realises, well, actually, it's pretty hard.
It's more difficult than people would have any idea. Vladimir Putin has been more difficult. Frankly, I had some problems with Zelensky. You may have read about him. And it's been more difficult than other wars. I mean, look.
Yeah, and it's pretty hard because both sides don't have really an incentive to stop fighting. Putin doesn't have an incentive to stop fighting because, you know, Trump has effectively enabled him since getting into office. And, you know, his desire to maintain the bromance with Trump is something that Putin has read as, well, keep going. And from the Ukrainian side, if, you know, the Russians are continuing their advance and continuing to try and take your territory, then, you know, why would you necessarily come to the peace table?
All right. Well, Matt, let's run through now this newfound approach to the war from Donald Trump, noting, of course, that we don't know how long it will last for because he does tend to change his mind quite often. He has given Russia 50 days to agree to a peace deal. That's almost 3 months, so it's a pretty long time, right?
Yeah, that's right. And as you say, this administration can turn on a dime. It can change its mind within an hour. And so therefore, if you're sitting in Ukraine, if you're in Kiev, you'd be possibly a little bit worried about this because 50 days is an awfully long amount of time for Trump to change his mind.
Yeah.
And the extra worry here, I think, is that Putin had told Trump about 10 days ago on a call that he was going to prosecute the war for at least another 60 days. And Trump gave him 50, which, doing the maths, 10 plus 50 is 60. So effectively, Putin got what he wanted. And that's why I think it's probably necessary to look beyond the conclusion that this is somehow a fundamental reset in US policy, because I think, Putin gets what he wants, he gets a green light, and unfortunately it means that he will continue to attack the Ukrainians with every tool at his disposal.
Okay, well, let's unpack what Trump has done and is threatening to do. Let's just start with the weapons deal he has struck with NATO nations. Just tell me exactly what that entails.
Yeah, well, this is American weaponry, about $10 billion worth, which is quite a lot, but it comprises a variety of different things that NATO member countries will buy from America and then give to the Ukrainians. And of course, what the Ukrainians need is, well, pretty much everything, but fundamentally they need surface-to-air missiles to knock down incoming Russian cruise missiles that are shot at their cities and critical infrastructure. The Patriot interceptors are the ones that they need, the surface-to-air missiles first of all, because what the Russians are doing is shooting upwards, some nights 740 drones, decoys and cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities, and it's very hard to knock all those down. But then they also need offensive weaponry that's able to, strike Russian troop formations, potentially even hit targets in Russia itself. So the laundry list of things that Kiev needs is quite lengthy. And a lot of these weapons had been actually tied up in Poland because Trump's Undersecretary for Defense, Elbridge Colby, had put a stop to American weapons going into Ukraine. So these have been held up for a while, and you assume that they'll be part of the tranche that goes into Ukraine as a result of this deal.
All right. So unlike under Joe Biden, where America was donating a massive amount of military aid to Ukraine and picking up the cost, of course, for that, the Europeans will now have to pay for this. I assume that makes Trump's MAGA base happy.
Yes. I mean, this is a bit of red meat because it says to them, we're not actually giving aid to Ukraine. What we're doing is we're selling American weapons. And a lot of them, I think, will be absolutely fine with that. And it's worth recalling also that there are some people who might not be MAGA, but they are nonetheless very strong supporters of Trump and actually want American weapons flowing into Ukraine. Lindsey Graham is a good example. But even if you're the most rusted on MAGA believer who absolutely doesn't want Ukraine to get a penny of aid or any weapons at all out of America, nonetheless, I think on this type of issue, there might be a little bit of bluster, but ultimately they'll fall into line behind Trump because they owe his positions to him.
But Matt, this is good for NATO too, isn't it? Because it wanted Trump to be more engaged. It's a win, if you like, for the Secretary-General of NATO, Mark Rutte, who's really been sucking up to Trump, hasn't he? Calling him daddy. So it's the soft diplomacy. It works, does it, with Donald Trump?
Well, perhaps it does. Maybe it's a combination of Rutte and Melania and a whole bunch of other things. Ultimately, look, it is good for NATO because it shows that the United States is at least to an extent, prepared to take European security worries seriously, even if that's only through selling weapons. So it is something that will give them comfort, but I don't think it's something that will change the minds of European leaders, that Trump is someone who ultimately is really just going to pursue an America first and a Trump first policy rather than necessarily have their interests always at heart.
All right, well, Matt, that's on the weaponry side. Now, if there's no end to the fighting in 50 days, Trump is also threatening tariffs against Russia.
We're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means.
Although they're secondary tariffs. So what does that mean?
Yeah, well, he said there's two things. There's going to be 100% tariffs, direct one-to-one tariffs on any imports from Russia for the US, and that's small beans because the size of that trade is about $3 billion. These secondary tariffs are the things that potentially could make the Kremlin sit up and take notice, because they're tariffs that America would put on countries that trade with Russia. And there are, a number of countries throughout the world, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, that continue trading with Russia. And so putting large tariffs on those countries might get them to change their own policies and might then have an effect on the Russian economy.
Right, yeah. And big players in that, of course, are China and India, allies of Russia. So what, does Donald Trump think that by putting economic pressure on them, they might then try and convince Vladimir Putin to end the war?
Well, he might. I think part of this also is an attempt to get those countries to buy American energy rather than Russian oil and gas. But then you have to question the fundamentals of this, because is America really going to slap a 500% tariff on India? The relationship with New Delhi is something that's really pretty important to Washington, and that would make it very, very bad indeed. And so any attempts by the Americans to sort of pry the Indians away from the Russians would be stymied, I think. So, when it comes to those really big economies that could put a dent in the Russian purse, you, I think, have to think carefully about whether, in fact, Trump will follow through on that.
All right. Well, Matt, I guess the real question is, will any of this actually change anything on the ground? Trump has never outlined what his so-called deal with Russia and Ukraine would look like. So why would Putin stop the war now when he has refused to do that for so long?
Well, look, he's at least got another 50 days before anything happens from the American side, with the exception of arming Ukraine. So I think that incentive for Putin remains to just let's keep going and see what happens. And for the Ukrainians as well, they will have come out of this big reveal by Trump thinking, well, it's great that we got the weaponry, but it's not terrific that the sanctions aren't going to kick in for 50 days. So therefore, we need to redouble our efforts too. And that means I think that the protagonists, Russia and Ukraine, are still really a long way apart. Yeah.
So what do you think we should expect from Vladimir Putin over the next 50 days?
I think Putin will throw everything he's got at Ukraine, which means a lot more drones, a lot more cruise missiles, and, a really concerted ground offensive. There are reports that the Russians have managed to mobilize, cobble together a really significant force to add to their offensive troops in Ukraine, and they will try and seize as much of Ukrainian territory as possible in those 50 days, because that will strengthen Putin's hand. He will be able to say, well, my troops are advancing. You need to give me a better deal if you want me to even think about peace.
Matthew Sussex is from the Centre for European Studies at the ANU. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.